Class A. Okay, so we are now in part 2 of Videocast number 3. This is the final installment for Night Chapter 4. And in this particular installment, we are expanding upon Elie's experience with the dentist. And we're also moving into another experience that he had that was very unfortunate with the hangings that he was forced to witness of other prisoners. So we already know, based on part 1 of Videocast number 3, that Elie's gold crown in his tooth was threatened by this dentist who was kind of a shisty guy, and was removing the gold crowns of all of the prisoners in order to use them for his personal gain. Now, he was thrown into jail for his crimes, and so because Elie was able to lie about being sick, he was able to escape that mistreatment. But he couldn't escape it forever. Somebody eventually would catch up to him in this gold tooth, or this gold crown. So we remember hearing about another one of the foremans. So Idic was the primary boss that Elie had to answer to, but there was another guy called Fronic who also was a foreman. Elie has this experience with him. Um, and so Fronic one day says to Elie, after he notices the gold crown, I'm starting this story at the very, very, very bottom of page 54. Fronic says to Elie, let me have your crown, kid. At the top of page 54, Elie says, I answered that I could not, because without that crown, I could no longer eat. For what they give you to eat, kid, I found another answer. My crown had been listed in the register during the medical checkup. This to mean trouble for us both. If you don't give me your crown, it will cost you much more. All of a sudden, this pleasant and intelligent young man had changed, because Fronic used to be very nice to Elie. Fronic's eyes were shining with greed. I told him that I needed to get my father's advice. Go ahead, kid, ask, but I want an answer by tomorrow. When I mentioned it to my father, he hesitated. After a long silence, he said, No, my son, we cannot do this. He will seek revenge. He won't dare, my son. Unfortunately, Fronic knew how to handle this. He knew my weak spot. My father had never served in the military and could not march in step. But here, whenever he moved from one place to another, it was in step. That presented Fronic with the opportunity to torment him and, on a daily basis, to thrash him savagely. Left, right, he punched him. Left, right, he slapped him. I decided to give my father lessons in marching in step and keeping time. We began practicing in front of our block. I would command, left, right, and my father would try. The inmates made fun of us. Look at the little officer teaching the old man to march. Hey, little general, how many rations of bread does the old man give you for this? But my father did not make sufficient progress, and the blows continued to rain on him. So, you still don't know how to march in step. You old good for nothing? This went on for 2 weeks. It was untenable. We had to give in. That day, Fronic burst into savage laughter. I knew it! I knew that I would win, kid. Better late than never. And because you made me wait, it will also cost you a ration of bread. A ration of bread for one of my pals, a famous dentist from Warsaw, to pay him for pulling out your crown. What? My ration of bread so that you can have my crown? Fronic smiled. What would you like? That I break your teeth by smashing your face? That evening, in the latrines, the dentist from Warsaw pulled my crown with the help of a rusty spoon. Fronic became pleasant again. From time to time, he even gave me extra soup. But it didn't last long. 2 weeks later, all the Poles were transferred to another camp. I had lost my crown for nothing. So you're going to use that story and the one about Elie's experience with the camp dentist to help you answer your questions for chapter 4. We're moving now into the very last portion. I know that the story that we just read, it wasn't a very positive one. You heard me say in Videocast number 2 that a lot of what happens in chapter 4 is in fact pretty negative. There's some really rough experiences that Elie has, and a lot of them don't have very good endings. It happens though, and especially in the overall experience that Elie had to survive in Auschwitz, there were many things to be survived, and many of them were very negative. So we are going to now look at Elie's experience with hangings. He, as a young boy, had to witness the hanging deaths of other prisoners in the camp. Okay. What I want to do is read through both of the texts. Wait until you've heard them both to help you answer the questions that you have to answer for your assignment. On the bottom, in the middle of page 61, the text starts 1 week later. We're going to start there. 1 week later, as we returned from work, there, in the middle of the camp, in the Appelplatz, the center of the camp, stood black gallows. We learned that soup would be distributed only after roll call, which lasted longer than usual. The orders were given more harshly than on other days, and there were strange vibrations in the air. "Caps off!" the camp senior suddenly shouted. 10,000 caps came off at once. "Cover your heads!" 10,000 caps were back on our heads, at lightning speed. The camp gate opened. An SS unit appeared and encircled us. 1 SS every 3 paces. The machine guns on the watchtowers were pointed toward the Appelplatz. "They were expecting trouble," whispered Juliet. 2 SS were headed toward the solitary confinement cell. They came back, the condemned man between them. He was a young boy from Warsaw, an inmate with 3 years in concentration camps behind him. He was tall and strong, a giant compared to me. His back was to the gallows, his face turned toward his judge, the head of the camp. He was pale, but seemed more solemn than frightened. His manacled hands did not tremble. His eyes were coolly assessing the hundreds of SS guards, the thousands of prisoners surrounding him. The camp senior began to read the verdict, emphasizing every word. "In the name of blah blah blah, prisoner number blah blah blah, stole during the air raid, blah blah blah, according to the law, blah blah blah, prisoner number blah blah blah, is condemned to death. Let this be a warning and an example to all prisoners." I heard the pounding of my heart. Thousands of people who died daily in Auschwitz and Birkenau, in the crematoria, no longer troubled me. But this boy, leaning against his gallows, upset me deeply. "This ceremony, will it be over soon? I'm hungry," whispered Juliet. At the sign of the camp senior, the block senior stepped up to the condemned youth. He was assisted by 2 prisoners, in exchange for 2 bowls of soup. The capo wanted to blindfold the youth, but he refused. After what seemed like a long moment, the hangman put the rope around his neck. He was about to signal his aides to pull a chair from under the young man's feet, when the latter shouted in a strong and calm voice, "Long live liberty! My curse on Germany! My curse! My—" The executioner had completed his work. Like a sword, the order cut through the air. "Caps off!" 10,000 prisoners paid their respects. "Cover your heads." Then The entire camp, block after block, filed past the hanged boy and stared at his extinguished eyes, the tongue hanging from his gaping mouth. Capos forced everyone to look at him squarely in the face. Afterward, we were given permission to go back to our block and have our meal. I remember that on that evening, the soup tasted better than ever. Now, as we read that, for whatever reason, Elie, well, I want you to think about what the reason is, why the reason is that Elie would think that the meal that he was having tasted good. It could have been that he was grateful for still being alive. He could have really just been that hungry. But there is some sort of reason why, even after seeing such a horrible sight, like being up close to a person who's deceased and who was killed in a violent way, that you would feel that your food tastes better than it ever has. Now, we're going to now move into the second hanging that Elie had to experience. And that was a little bit more difficult for him, although I would think that both would be very, very difficult. We're still toward the top of page 63. It says, I watched other hangings. I never saw a single victim weep. These withered bodies had long forgotten the bitter taste of tears, except once. The leader of the 52nd Cable Commando was a Dutchman, a giant of a man, well over 6 feet. He had some 700 prisoners under his command, and they all loved him like a brother. Nobody had ever endured a blow or even an insult from him. In his service was a young boy, excuse me. This one had a delicate and beautiful face, an incredible sight in the camp. One day, the power failed at the central electric plant in Buna. The Gestapo, summoned to inspect the damage, concluded that it was sabotage. They found a trail. It led to the block of this Dutch leader, and after a search, they found a significant quantity of weapons. The leader was arrested on the spot. He was tortured for weeks on end in vain. He gave no names. He was transferred to Auschwitz and never heard from again. But his young servant remained behind in solitary confinement. He too was tortured, but he too remained silent. The SS then condemned him to death, him and 2 other inmates who had been found to possess arms. One day, as we returned from work, we saw 3 gallows, 3 black ravens erected on the Appelplatz. Roll call. The SS surrounding us, machine guns aimed at us, the usual ritual. 3 prisoners in chains, and among them, the little boy, the sad-eyed angel. The SS seemed more preoccupied, more worried than usual. To hang a child in front of thousands of onlookers was not a small matter. The head of the camp read the verdict. All eyes were on the child. He was pale, almost calm, but he was biting his lips as he stood in the shadow of the gallows. This time, the camp senior, refused to act as executioner. 3 SS took his place. The 3 condemned prisoners together stepped onto the chairs. In unison, the nooses were placed around their necks. "Long live liberty!" shouted the 2 men, but the boy was silent. "Where is merciful God? Where is he?" someone behind me was asking. At the signal, the 3 chairs were tipped over. Total silence in the camp. On the horizon, the sun was setting. "Caps off!" screamed the camp senior. His voice quivered. As for the rest of us, we were weeping. Cover your heads. Then came the march past the victims. The two men were no longer alive. Their tongues were hanging out, swollen and bluish, but the third rope was still moving. The child, too light, was still breathing, and so he remained for more than half an hour, lingering between life and death, writhing before our eyes, and we were forced to look at him at close range. He was still alive when I passed him. His tongue was still red, his eyes not extinguished. Behind me, I heard the same man asking, "For God's sake, where is God?" From within me, I heard a voice answer, "Where he is. This is where. Hanging here, from the gallows." That night, the soup tasted of corpses. So, it's a really difficult thing for you guys to have to read. I hope that me reading it along with you helped you out a little bit. Not only to have somebody to be sad with you, because it's a really sad section of the text to read, but also to give you a better, if it's possible, a better visual of what Elie is trying to describe to us. We want to understand why it is that the first time Elie sees this person hang, that even directly after when he eats, his food tastes delicious. But somehow, the second time around, when he watches this young boy suffer, the taste of the food changes. So as you're conducting your assignment in just a moment, I want you to really reflect deeply on why that might be, and go back and reread some of the sections of chapter 4 to provide an answer that you think is true, based on your analysis. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same answer as everyone else. I just want you to take some real consideration here. Okay. You guys know the drill. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me, and I'll do my very best to get back to you in a reasonable amount of time. Also, please keep in mind that we are going to have a quiz up to chapter 5, I believe it is, on Thursday. So make sure that you are keeping up with the texts, and good luck on that assessment. Miss you guys a lot, and I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.